All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Key to Games podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we discuss the game industry and game design topics. We missed last week's show as we were both dealing with a whole lot of busyness going on. Thankfully for me, all my the copyright claims I sent have all been retracted, so nothing was done, at least to her other channels. And how's everything with you, Josh?
Everything's going well. I'm fully caught up on everything, and it's glad to be back. I had a void missing this last week, so it's always a pleasure to be back. I'm ready to rock.
Hello, Amanda and Rat's Tail.
Oh, let me get chat up.
And I have Comcast coming out tomorrow for the umpteenth time to see if they can figure out what's going on with the internet. So fingers, I guess, umpteenth crossed again.
Umpteenth cross.
But it's been a very interesting week. I did my 100th Indie Dev Showcase, so I looked back at all the ones I did. I picked 30 of my favorite games. So now I have to start with the next 100.
That's right. I think that won't be a challenge at all, Josh. You're going to be plenty lined up there.
Oh, yes. And still waiting to hear back about the next books and all kinds of crazy stuff along those lines. But we did hit 8,500 subscribers, so 1,500 and less, or 1,500 and more counting, and then is the big 10K. When all the
that is amazing.
And I'll get my big fancy YouTube plaque that will go somewhere behind me.
Right up there, yeah.
Yeah. And hello, Matthew. So, for our show today, this was kind of the news last week that we were playing a little catch-up on, but it was announced that for 2022, E3 has been canceled. And for some people out there, it is a big deal. For others, they're just like, it's just a show. But it did bring up the interesting point about trade shows and major events and what they mean for marketing and developers today. Because much like how Steam has really, opened things up for indie game marketing and indie devs and indie games, it has also opened up the door for digital shows and digital conferences and things along those lines. And this is beyond just with the pandemic as well, because for those of you who remember 2021, and I think it was in 2020 as well, most of the shows were either canceled or they went virtual. And while it's still relatively unsure what's going to happen this year, it's still an option to have virtual shows and being able to get these games out there. I think one of the best things for me has been talking to a lot of developers out of Brazil. As Brazil, for the last 5 to 6 years, I think they've been really pushing to be another game dev space. And I usually get a email at least a few times each year about, a big trade show or a big way to check out developers out of Brazil and what they're up to.
Yeah, definitely. For infrastructures like Brazil and stuff like that, I think trade shows are still really important. But regardless, we're looking at a time right now, and I think this has been we've been trending this way for a while now with E3. I think if you can remember, it's kind of been just like we've kind of moved on a little bit, like in how we get our news about video games and how we find out information. Like I think a few years back, E3 just started. Everything was being leaked, right? It used to be a major event, and then it was just a major event of leaks prior to E3, right? And so by the time E3 happened, everybody knew what was going to happen. And this started trending a few years back. And then with the pandemic, I think it really squeezed it further. And it really made people realize that maybe the expenses of renting a booth and the expenses of travel, safety concerns, it's just not really worth the investment that is required maybe to attend these type of shows, and just the reward that you get isn't enough, right, for mainly indie developers to even consider doing it. One thing that's been on my mind as we're talking about this was GDC. For example, GDC's attendance was down 59%, and that's a massive deal. So if people in E3 are looking at that, if the trend of developers is something that they might consider, then looking at that the devs just didn't head out there, it's down that much. that might be a reason for them to cancel that.
And I think you may be frozen right now. Your cam has not moved in like the last like 20 seconds.
Awesome. Let me see here. It's just been let's see, my mic didn't work at first.
Mm-hmm.
And now, okay, let me switch to the backup camera. It's going to be a little blurry.
All
Let me switch. I got a backup camera. Go.
There you go. Are. Okay, there.
Right. This is a little blurry, but it's my backup one. I'm using a backup mic today and a backup camera, so.
And to Rat's Tales comment, I think you just described the Twitter there. Twitter simulator. Yeah, and I think, as you said, like, for a lot of countries, especially those that aren't, like the major places for the game industry, having these trade shows is still an important way. It's a great way to get kind of everyone together and kind of, expand the broadcast. That's kind of the reason why I do the Indie Dev Showcases, because instead of just covering one game, I cover 6 games. So when a developer promotes their game, they're also promoting the other 5. And it's just like kind of trying to build that feedback loop.
And, that's right. It's really important for building communities. You know what I mean? It's all the devs can get together and meet in a certain area. Really good social aspects that come to that. So yeah, it's super important, Josh.
Mm-hmm. And with E3, as you said, like one of the big things is definitely like the costs of going to these shows, booking a booth, and of course even preparing stuff for them as well. And that's been, of course, a major frustration for a lot of developers, especially if you're not a Nintendo or a Sony and you don't have that huge amount of money. And it can be, in a lot of cases, almost like fire and forget, hoping that the game actually works, and hoping that the trade show works out for you. Or
we always hope the game works, Josh.
Yeah, true. You don't want to go to a trade show and it's bugged and it doesn't work, because I've seen that happen a few times. I remember when I went to GDC and they were showing FTL and like the whole game crashed in like the middle of the booth there.
The devs are behind you secretly hoping that you don't find the bug or it doesn't crash out.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And like, we're just, like, real quick, I just did a quick search. So like a 600 square foot at E3 costs about $30K. And that's just the rental space, right? So then we're talking about everything else. And then we just mentioned the build. Getting a build together specifically for an event is its own thing in its own. You're almost sometimes making a different game just for that, right? Because you have to specially cater and create it with all the considerations about that. That's actually a topic I'd want to talk about. If demos are still worth it, are they? You know what I mean? Something I'd like to get into one time. But yeah, I mean, $30K is a massive investment to even just to start, and that's just to get into the door, right? So
yeah. Yeah, it's been acting all wibbly wobbly over here. I can see the internet on my side, or I can see OBS doing its thing. But yeah, let's
wibbly wobbly.
Yeah, but yeah, let's put demos on the list as well, because I think that could be a good one to discuss in a future one.
Definitely.
But yeah, with the idea of having these shows, and again, like the cost that goes into it, I know for some developers, it was kind of like E3 or Gamescom or whatever. It basically takes over your studio for like 3 to 6 months prior, on top of developing the game, for real.
Right. So like it literally can put development of the game to a halt while you're trying to do that. Because like I said, it's a whole different thing that you're trying to structure. And I think that caused a lot of things like, when people see old demos at E3 and they're like, it looked nothing like that. And that's because the demo they're making is not the actual game, right? We're making a demo to try and show what we hope is the vision of the game and stuff like that. And so things aren't always going to make it over, and it's always a special catered demo. And so that's something you always want to remember, right? And you're talking like minimum, like you said, 3-6 months, maybe like a full year, right? 9 months, like depending on how big your studio is, how much you got. And that's a lot of allocation. That's a lot of resources that could be dedicated to other things like getting the game done and finished and out the door. So.
Hmm. And again, you don't know who's going to be looking at your game. And that's always the double-edged sword. You can go to one of these shows and maybe somebody from a developer or a major publisher or just, you never know if a YouTuber or streamer, shows your game off and all of a sudden it takes off.
Right. And it's always, so that's one of the big benefits is like, it's always who you know, and going to those things is always a great place to meet everybody in the industry. You know what I mean? So that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the main things. You never know who will be there, who's looking at your game. The double-edged sword, though, is no one could be looking at your game at that trade show. Maybe no one will see it. That is the downside. I've gone to, small indie shows and stuff and attendance was very poor. Basically, it was just the devs there, and that was it. And places, but over here we're talking like maybe in Ohio and stuff like that, where the game dev community is very small, very niche.
Yeah. And yeah, of course, location is a very big point. Again, why I think digital has been a very big boon for any development, like all across the board. When you're online, you don't need to worry about what's going on in your local neighborhood. And that can certainly help out. But the use of these shows, I think, has certainly changed over the last 10 years. Because like you said, we are in a very internet world. It is increasingly rare for a big reveal to be a big reveal. Because
Right.
it will get leaked, somebody will mention it, and even like the major shows, like E3, the PC Game Show, the Video Game Awards, we still kind of know what to
Yeah.
expect. And
Yeah.
even then, the issue with the game industry is if you do a big reveal and says, "Okay, coming in 2026," it's like, okay, I'll put my excitement back on the shelf and come back to it in a few years.
Please be excited, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and so yeah, like you announce it, and then no one's be years before it's going to come to fruition, or even have a demo or something like that. So that's always, how do you announce it is the other thing, right?
Yep.
So
And for a lot of these shows, beyond just the logistical challenge, as you said, you also have to make sure you have, a trade show worthy demo. Because it has to be different than, something that someone's just going to download off of Steam or off of PSN. Because again, you don't have 20 minutes, a few hours for somebody to play a demo on the middle of a store or an expo booth or expo floor.
yeah, like an expo demo especially is even different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Completely different than something that you do like at a next festival or something, where the gamers actually have time to sink their teeth into it. You can have streamers stream your game during the festival. That stuff doesn't really happen when you go to a public show. And so you go there and you have a few seconds to really hook them with your gameplay, which is really hard. You got to explain to them what you need to do. I've played at expos, and of course the game is just not designed right. You can't take maybe I don't know, maybe like an MMO or something like that. They just aren't going to work really well in that setting. And so you can come to maybe like a really confusing game that there's no way you can get that across in an expo, and they're there trying to get it across and it just doesn't work. So some just don't even fit in that situation to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's another really good point. Just like when we talk about with early access, I don't think every game can really show itself off on an expo or in a trade show. Because like you said, you don't have, hours or even minutes at a time. Like if there's a line, 30, 40 people deep, you can't just spend an hour with one person, because then you're losing out on those other 30 to 35 people. So the demo has to be presented very well. You have to get into it incredibly quickly. And obviously, it has to be something that represents your game. And it can't, frustrate somebody. Because I've heard horror stories of like people going to like trade shows and developers like, no, you're doing it wrong, or they yell at the person. Like, that's always good. Like, that's how you want to behave in front of your consumers.
Right. You're not playing my game right.
Exactly. That's always the best point about that. And You have to. I think the role of these shows has certainly had to evolve with being more virtual, being more open. So I guess here's a question for you and for the chat. Hopefully we can. Hopefully people are
I
still able to
know.
watch. I know it's dipping in and out right now. Do you think physical trade shows are still viable? I think for the greater market today, or do you think that virtual is superior?
I think that we need to have both. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's still viable. I just don't think it's as viable as it used to be. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think years ago that was the way to do it. Right. That was like the only way to do it, and it was like an
Mm-hmm.
exclusive club. Things have opened up, big time. Uh, and I think that the dev community as a whole is realizing that we can be a lot more global with things like Discord. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed a big, massive trend during GDC that a lot of developers were doing like not GDC
Mm-hmm.
hashtags, right? So they were actually celebrating not going to GDC and just celebrating that we don't have to do that. We can
Mm-hmm.
stay here and we can have a global community virtually, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, the social aspects of gathering together, I think, just can't be matched, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
just something that's really important. That personal camaraderie and things like that you won't be able to achieve with virtual meetings.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's still viable, just not like as much as it used to be, right? That was like the only way you could do it back in the day, really. And
Mm-hmm.
now we have so many other avenues for developers to. I mean, you can do it through TikTok, right? And not even
Mm-hmm.
do something wild like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think the social side is another big factor because you can't really do, I think, networking as
right.
well in virtual events.
Not at all.
And it is going to be tough because there are a lot of developers, and like I follow plenty of them on Twitter who say, like if I'm handicapped or if I'm outside the country,
Right.
I can't just hop on a plane and fly to San Francisco every year.
Right. Like we were talking about the developers in Brazil. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my word, imagine how much it would cost to set up the demo and head over here, and then what returns are you going to get from it? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It'd be so hard. So yeah, definitely. I agree
Mm-hmm.
with that, Josh.
Yeah. And I think again, like the overall purpose of these shows, like from like the macro sense, like they still have importance for developers. I think one of the things that I like going back to what I said a few minutes ago about the indie dev showcases, it's really like one of the major purposes is to amplify developers because one person showing off their game, it's easy to miss. If you have 500 demos, 1,000 demos, and so on, it's it becomes a lot easier to get that word out there. Much like
Right.
in a way via itch mega bundles. That when we see, okay, now there's like 10,000 or 8,000 games being sold for support, that's a lot easier of a message than just saying, here's 3 games that are
Right.
trying to raise support for Ukraine.
Right, exactly. It definitely like helps solidify the direction, and that this in the community for the devs. Definitely. Right. Right, Tail.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I think with like how much we've seen virtual, like to like switch to talking about virtual for a second, I do think the whole Next Fest, Steam festivals, and so on have been a major boon to developers. I don't know if it's as perfect as I would like to see. So I guess as an indie developer yourself, and for any indie developers watching, what are your thoughts on kind of Steam's latest trend of using Next Fest? I know they have like indie celebration. Sometimes they may do like indie games of Europe, indie games of Canada, and so on.
I think right now is literally probably the best or perfect time. Just like
Mm-hmm.
it's like kind of like the perfect storm to be doing like these next festivals and stuff. I had the numbers up earlier, but now I can't get them back up. But games that participated in like the Steam festivals, they got massive traffic. You just get massive eyes. Huge, because like we were talking about having all those games and everything. Well, that's a lot of buzz and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
attention. And so, like, just like people like yourself that stream all the games
Mm-hmm.
from the festivals and stuff like that, it's a big buzz, right? And so, regardless, you're getting most games. You're just going to get a lot of eyes on them. It depends, of course, on the game and the marketing and stuff like that. But it draws in a massive amount of people. So right now, doing online fest is probably at its peak right now. I think right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And being able to amplify all these games, I think more importantly, I think the one thing that this team has been trying to improve on is making it easier to find them. That I remember one year you couldn't even search NextFest on the front page. You had to go to a game that was in NextFest,
Yeah.
and then that would link you back to it.
Yeah, no, they're definitely seem to be pushing it a lot harder now,
Mm-hmm.
and I've just noticed it again. The climate has changed, so I definitely seem to, they're pushing it really hard. These festivals, and on the back end, they are really trying to get us to participate in them. Also, we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly, if you have a Steam game or something like that, they want you to participate in it. So,
Mm-hmm. So here's a question for you and as well for chat. With NextFest and kind of like in the first year, obviously all the games that were on NextFest were new to NextFest. But as we've seen with each, I think it's like every 6 months, maybe once a year, that there are games that have been on NextFest still getting promoted on the newest one. And there's been arguments as to whether or not if you've been on NextFest, year 2021, can you be featured on NextFest in 2022?
yeah, I think so, and I think I've noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed some games being able to ride multiple festivals,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to ride like get more of a long tail in marketing that seemed to kind of develop because of the virtual how everything is virtual now. So things are getting more of a long tail. I think if you're
Mm-hmm.
able to hop on festivals like that, I think yeah, you can definitely.
Mm-hmm. And I think with the number of games, I think one of the advantages of Next Fest and so on is the fact that it does allow those not as I think expo friendly games to take root. Because again, like you said, like an MMO, a tactical strategy game, something that it takes minutes or even hours to learn,
Yeah.
you're not going to find that on an expo show. You're not really going to be able to show that off. In a kind of a weird tangent, it makes me wonder how Firaxis has done at trade shows with like the Civ games and XCOM.
Yeah, that's strange. I guess I think by the time they were hitting they already had a little bit of clout. I'd have
Mm-hmm.
to check the timeline, right? Maybe they already
Yeah.
had a bit of clout before that.
Mm-hmm. So with like their role in marketing today, I guess as a quick aside, for people watching us, I'm trying to think of all the major trade shows. So obviously we
Jeez.
have E3, GDC, Gamescom, PAX.
Tax.
And I'm trying to think if there's any other major names. And if anyone can let me know, because I talked about this in one of my presentations, it was also a way of me doing my homework. Are there any other major trade shows? 'Cause obviously, there are tons and tons of local ones.
Yeah, small local ones. I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
remember. I feel like we're missing like just one. I think you
Yeah.
pretty much named them all.
The Tokyo Game Show, maybe.
Yeah, TGS,
Mm-hmm.
PAX, MegaCon, PAX Prime, South by Southwest.
I don't think we mentioned that one.
No. Well, it's like music and film, right? So music and film and stuff like that. I think it counts.
And with preparing for these shows, I guess as another question, like this is something for the indie devs like yourself, like do you have to submit or do you get like an invitation to some of these shows? Because I know there's been like I'm sure for like larger shows like E3, like TGS, like they may sound an invitation or they may like inform developers when it's time. But I'm sure for smaller devs you have to submit an application or file
Yeah,
one.
yes, you do have to submit. It depends. On some you get asked, but for majority of them you do have to submit to make it into uh there. unless it's just like a giant one where you're paying your way in.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's I think kind of why we see a lot of popularity around virtual shows, because there really is no, I guess, like maintenance cost for it. You don't have to worry about travel. You don't have to worry about setting up. But like we said, the question, of course, the X factor is the social elements of this.
Yeah,
Because as a
yeah,
developer, when you put your game on a Next Fest or on any kind of virtual thing, you're not talking to the consumer. We
yeah.
did. I participated in kind of like a virtual conference. I think this was maybe either E3 or MagFest. I think MagFest is another one. And it was like, here's a Discord channel. You can, go into each one of these rooms and talk to people. And, it's just, it's like so soulless when you do it like that.
Right. It's so I participated in some of them and it's very soulless, right? Like there's no it's very transactional.
Mm
It takes like all of the meeting elements out of it and it just
hmm.
makes
Mm
it
hmm.
just very and like when you can switch videos like that, it just makes it so it just soulless. I don't know. I just soulless is the
Yeah.
only word I can think of.
Yeah. And
Um
I was gonna say, like, I tried to do interviews, like at that one. It was like, okay, here's a podcast, and like, yeah, but it's only like 20 minutes long, so it's
yeah.
like there's not much in it for me. And I tried to do. Here's a funny story. I went to GDC because I was trying to do some interviews there, and I made the rookie mistake of running up 3 flights of stairs to get to the third floor before I gave my interviews. So like the whole time I couldn't barely talk. Don't try to do the Rocky thing
Yeah,
before you do an
right.
interview. And yet, like, it's having that face to face again, like what we do here, the podcast on Game
Yeah.
Wisdom and all that. It is very great to have the person in the room or virtually in the room like this to be able to communicate, because you can only say so much, convey so much in a store page or in your demo itself, that you're kind of missing it. And I think like the story of the developer kind of gets lost when
Yeah.
you don't get to see them.
Yeah, so like one of the what like I mean, okay, so we're missing one like real important point. When I
Mm-hmm.
have the ability, if someone's playing the game, I get to watch the reaction. I get to
Mm-hmm.
see them. I get to communicate with them when they're done playing it. You could see it in their eyes if they liked it or if they didn't. There's a lot of things that you're just
Mm-hmm.
not going to get from someone saying, "Yeah, cool game, nice," or whatever. You know, you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to find that out. And then again, you establish relationships. They get to find out about you, learn about
Mm-hmm.
who you are as a developer, and from that they might follow you and like you just from your personal story, like you said, which is really hard to get across in a static web page or a static, or even if I made a video right about me, hi, I'm a developer, this that,
Yeah.
it's still very static, right?
And you don't want that information on your store page as well, because part of the marketing is presenting your game the best light. You don't want to
Right.
have on your store page, I took out 3 mortgages on my home to make this game. Please buy or I will be thrown out on the street. People aren't going to. You'll get some people interested in that,
A
but
few. I think it maybe we could have done like a 4 years, 5, 10 years ago, it would have worked maybe once. You could have done it
yeah.
one time. One dev was like, please, I'm gonna be homeless, and then
Hmm.
and then they all bought his game, but that's not a common stick to run on.
Yeah. And like you just said with the playtesting aspect, and of course being able to communicate to people.
Yeah.
My friend Ken, who he did the Kickstarter for his game, The Big Shuffle, that we had sponsored. I think that was back in March or February. Like he went to the one of the trade shows out in, I believe it was Pennsylvania, and he got a chance to meet like all the different like tabletop fans. There are people who are like, this game is horrible, and then there are a lot of people like, oh yeah, this is amazing. But again, it's that face to face interaction. And like even if we talk about things at the local level, like
Yeah.
going to like little shows or little meetings of developers, not just IGA meetings, but like a lot of developers who are usually in like a local space, they may organize a time to meet, do play testing, and like we said,
Exactly.
play testing is
Playtesting.
huge out of this.
Huge. Huge, huge, huge. And It got a little bit during the past few years. It was a little hard to organize and everything like that. But when we would, I mean, again, you get so much out of playtesting, and you learn from each other.
Hmm.
There's just so many things that you get out of it through that, and then you can share your war stories. You develop your community, and when you meet local devs in your area, like you said, go to your local dev, go to your local trade shows. I think that's really important too. Not Don't just be looking at GDC and E3. Look at your local area, because growing your local scene is going to grow the entire scene, right? Like
Hmm.
we were talking about first, Brazil. Brazil's trying to grow their scene. By Brazil getting stronger, the entire game dev community is stronger.
Yeah. And the other aspect, you don't know sometimes who's in your local scene because
Exactly.
everyone is very remote like that. The developer of the game Helix, like just a crazy like fever dream RPG, he apparently lives in northern New Jersey. Now, of course, that doesn't mean much for me because I'm in South Jersey, but like we're like state connected like that.
Connected, yeah, definitely.
And being able to again meet people, being able to do networking, it as we've said many times over, networking is a huge aspect of the game dev space, especially in the indie dev space. And like you just said, and as we were saying earlier, like being able to amplify all these voices through trade shows, through networking like that, it's really can mean the difference between success and failure for a lot of smaller devs.
Yeah, like
Getting
literally, someone who you could meet at the trade
mhm.
show could mean the difference between the success of your game or like the failure. You can meet someone there. Someone can help change the trajectory of your game that you meet at a trade show. And and meeting them on a Discord or on Twitter wouldn't is not really going to be the same. It can be kind of close, maybe, but again, that personal one-on-one
Mhm.
meeting relationship is way more memorable and way more valuable. So I think. We are going to see for a little bit. It is going to be online based, but I think we're going to get a surge back to like the trade shows in a little bit. Maybe in another year or so, I feel like it's really going to surge back more toward public media. And I think people are really kind of hungry for it to head back
Yeah.
out.
And to Melwinius' comment about Tim Keenan, yeah, like I interviewed Tim Keenan several times about Duskers, and like he really attributes his consumers and the people who looked at his game and play tested it as a major reason for the success of it. And it is important, again, like one of the big advantages of local shows or very specialized shows is that it pretty much gives you like finger on the pulse of that community. Like if you're building a tabletop game and there's a
Yeah,
tabletop convention, in 2-3 weeks, that's a really good place to find out if people are going to like your game.
that's
Or
amazingly invaluable. Yeah, definitely.
or if it's an RPG show or an anime convention or even just like retro games. If you're building a modern retro game, take your game to where people are playing retro titles and see what they think. And what was I about to say? And like, there's another show I'm going to be looking at too many games that I need to try and pitch a topic for them. Which, if anyone can think of a topic, I could pitch them to try and do like a booth or a panel there. Let me know because my mind is like going 6 different ways with all the book writing I'm doing, so I don't know what to focus on there. But you can get so much out of these shows. Now, I would say that there is one thing you have to be careful of. I think this is something I want to get your thoughts on, as well as for the chat. That only listening to trade show feedback, because I've seen some games that you'll look on their store page and they'll get best in show 2018 or everyone at the trade show loved my game, and then when the game comes out,
Yeah.
it gets blindsided by
That,
negative reviews.
That's so strange that you mentioned that, because I've noticed that like you see games that have received multiple trade show awards, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
again, it's just blasted, and you see how it sells, and it doesn't correlate with the rewards that it got. It got multiple rewards,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing. It doesn't correlate to anything. So of course, what you can extrapolate from that is that awards from anything is not going to guarantee you anything. Of course, right? There's no
Mm-hmm.
guarantee. Um, but yeah, I do think that, like we were talking about earlier, if I'm going to go to it, I'm going to say that they were catering their demo for the trade show,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where the fall lies. Because that would be saying like I'm catering my game to an arcade environment, but I'm going to release it on consoles,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that's kind of around the realm where it is, and maybe that's the fault that they might have fallen into, because the feedback loop from the trade show was constantly positive, so they kept catering to it, and then that's the fault.
Yeah, and I think that may be like one of the risks of only listening to trade shows. So like we
Yeah,
said, the social aspect is a boon, but it also means you're oftentimes not as critical when the
yeah,
developer is standing right behind you, clenching like a paper, thinking, "Oh God, please
right,
let my game work. Please don't let it crash."
right,
And this is something that I spoke with John Brieger about when we talked about playtesting and why he will oftentimes request, video recordings
yeah,
or after action reports because he doesn't want to be influencing what the consumer is doing. And that is oftentimes what happens when the developer is standing over their shoulder or just in the general vicinity. You can't really be like 100% impartial when you have this, and not only that, but the trade show, if it's loud, if it's hard to
yeah.
keep track of things like that. Like I played a few games where I couldn't hear a damn thing. So if your
Mm-hmm.
game is relying on audible feedback or
Yeah,
tutorials, I got
yeah.
nothing.
And a lot of times, and when you were going back to about the critical feedback, so
Mhm.
I'm playing, right, I'm playing this developer's game. I know they put their heart and soul to this. They're looking at me while I'm
Mhm.
playing it, so I'm not gonna be like, "This is the worst thing I've ever played. I can't believe you wasted all your time on this." But like, so you're gonna be really nice, great job. Like, you're not gonna give the most critical feedback. And even as a dev, right? Like, maybe being a dev, you have more empathy for it. You're gonna be even less critical, right?
Yeah.
Um, so
And
yeah, for sure.
yeah, man, I think that's another really good point. Just as the trade shows kind of amplify specific audiences, it also creates that feedback, the echo chamber
Echo
effect.
chamber.
Like if, and I think that's what kind of happened. There's this game that I played, Sky Shines Bedlam. This was like 5, 6 years ago, and this was another game that you look on the store page every year, every trade show I went to, best in show, most original idea, you know, top 10 winner, etc. Game came out, every consumer hated this game.
Yeah.
Like so many like UX issues. A lot of people found it too difficult, too punishing. And I interviewed the developer like about 6 months after the game came out. He was like, I had no idea. Like everyone at
Wow.
the trade shows, every trade show, everybody loved the game. Like no feedback, no negative feedback, I should say, whatsoever. And I just wonder if they did any playtesting beyond the trade show. Because, like you said, looking at a game with the developer 3 feet behind you versus looking at this game all alone when you can just focus entirely on it
Yeah.
are two very different things. And like I said, like when it comes to the issues with this game, they weren't hidden. Like this was stuff people were arguing about within like 4 minutes of loading it up. Like I had those issues too. And it led to them having to almost completely rebuild all the game systems. It took like I think like a year.
Mm-hmm.
And by then
Probably
of
had to
course,
dump mostly everything. Yeah, but probably had to dump most everything for
yeah.
that. Yeah.
And again, it was that case where you saw like nothing but praise from, all the critics loved it, all the people at trade shows loved it. But the second it got into the consumer's hands, complete nosedive.
Right. Like Bradshaw says, if you're
Yeah.
not getting negative feedback, there's something seriously wrong. Yeah, that means like you're definitely in an echo chamber, or you're not getting critical feedback, or you're not getting feedback at all, right? Or none of that
Mm-hmm.
is valuable. And then, like I said, I think what was this game you mentioned?
Sky Shines Bedlam.
Sky Shines Benlow. I'm gonna look it up, but I have a feeling, just like you said, especially if there was like UI things again. So like at the trade shows, again, people probably weren't going to comment on the UI, or they expect these things to be changed or fixed, right? So they're like, oh, of course they see that
Yeah.
that UI is terrible. This dev sees that. No way, they're going to change that. This is just a demo, right? So that's also a thing. They might not mention those things because of that.
Yeah, and I think that is another tangent I would like to rant about at some point about how the first version of a game can or cannot differ from the final version. Because with a lot of the games I've played on early access, I see issues whether it's a design or UI UX point of view. Like this is like version 1 of early access, and in a lot of cases, that stuff is still in 1.0. Like,
Yeah.
it's oftentimes rare. Like, I'll give you two examples. When we played Cavity Busters and Revita, both games, very first version on early access, it was like, it was okay, but it was very frustrating to play. And then as it went through, it actually improved. And I mean, that is really great to see. But I mean, the game. Why do I always forget the name of it? I think it was Besieged, maybe? It was like this kind of like a Banjo Kazooie nuts and bolts. You build like crazy vehicles, entirely physics driven.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And day one or week one of early access, I had so much trouble playing that game. Couldn't figure out the tutorial. The onboarding was not right. I was like, surely they'll fix it. And then 7 years later, I play it. It's the exact same tutorial.
What is this game? This physics? Because I think I remember playing it, and I was so confused by the tutorial or the onboarding. I remember it was
I think it was Besieged. It could have been.
I think that sounds about right. Besieged.
And what you said about kind of the consumer thinking the developer knows about the issue, I think that is a very salient point about this. Because I think again it goes back to another major point about kind of like what people understand about game design. And I think a lot of people assume the developer is the master of this game. Like they know everything about. Like they build it. Surely they know every single UI point and all that. But like we say, like playtesting is worth its weight in gold, like times 10. And having somebody tell you, yeah, I can't, this doesn't feel right, or, I'm confused by this. That is stuff that rings, that should be ringing like the cathedral bells in your head when you hear them. Like what Rat's Tail said earlier, that if you're not getting negative feedback, if everyone says your game is perfect and don't change anything, that should be a major sign that something is not right or you're not getting the right feedback.
Yeah.
Like another thing that John said, that like the two worst things you can tell a developer, one is your game sucks, it's horrible, or two, your game is perfect, don't change anything.
Exactly, because both of those do nothing.
Yeah. Yep, and to Melwinius' comment, like I wrote an article about what I learned, how you can learn life lessons from roguelikes. And one of the things I said in that was failure is a really important lesson. It's a great teacher in terms of, what is going on. Like, it's good to understand when you mess up. And you need to have that feedback in order to improve.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean it'd be like playing Dark Souls, right? And you don't know if you're getting better or not. There's no way to know if you improved. It'd be like the same thing.
Yeah, I did beat a market at Soul Level 2 the other night.
Wow! Did you do that on the stream?
No.
Oh man!
I punched him to death. I just kept jumping and punching him. And now I'm going for like a whole like dual fist build. So I got the dragon fist in one hand and like the Ketis in the other hand. So I'm just going to throw around punching people, bleeding and burning them.
That's a good build. I like that.
Yeah. But before this turns into the Elden Ring cast
again every time.
Yeah, and I think that is, I think, one of the downsides about trade shows, anything both virtual and in person, is not getting negative feedback. Because in a lot of cases, either two things will happen. Nobody plays your game, or not enough people play your game. Or again, they're just going to tell you like the most latest take. Like, yeah, I liked it. Or, it was okay. And then they walk away and you never hear from them again.
Right. And I mean, honestly, I've probably done Me myself, I've done that. I've told the developer, yeah, I'll follow you, I'll get the car, and I didn't, and you lost it. You didn't pay. So yeah, that happens, and
Mm-hmm.
I think probably the last one that I went to before the pandemic, there was a lot of devs and games that I meant to follow up with, but I didn't. So
Mm-hmm.
it most of those games didn't get their effectiveness from me. But
Yeah, and I would argue that trade shows definitely great for social interaction, but you should not be basing your playtesting
right,
100% on trade shows because it is such a different atmosphere. And like you said, oftentimes what you put into a trade show is its own unique version. That's not going to be the same in the game. And we've seen this may be probably something to discuss more when we talk about demos and another topic. But you need to be careful with what you represent in the demo and how your game is structured for real. Because I've played a few demos where,
completely different.
yeah, and they'll sometimes say, okay, you're going to do level 1, then you're going to do level 16, then you're going to do level 35, and we're just kind of moving you around to these major beats. And that's not going to be, you're not seeing playtesting on levels 2, 3, 4, 2 to 15 in that case.
Right, right, yeah, and then so you have a massive game that's unbalanced.
Hmm.
Everything's unbalanced.
And I think to take this more back, or to go back to kind of like Next Fest and shows like this, I do think the online space is still, I think it is going to not only remain it's viable, but I think it's going to grow in terms of popularity. Because, like we've said, it basically gives developers that megaphone without all the added costs and logistical nightmare of having to attend. But I do wonder, I guess this is a question for you and for any developers watching. Do you think there is room for improvement? And if so, what would you change?
Definitely room for improvement, and I have no idea how to solve it. But it would be how do you get the ability to interact with the gamers on like a trade show level, right? Because
Hmm.
like when you do, it's so fast. Everything's happening so
Yeah.
fast. Everybody's downloading your game, streaming it like that. So how could you have a more personal booth meeting or something like that, like a VR booth meeting type thing or something like that? I think just a way to add more personalism into it, because even when you have festivals and they have Discord and they have, like we were just talking about, so it'll be they'll do speeches, they'll do the thing, and then you all meet up in the Discord. But then again, it still feels really disconnected and so
Yeah.
sterile. It doesn't feel, there's just something really missing from it, and again, it's just that personal connection. And it also makes it feel like it's not worth, sometimes like you're not getting as much out of it as a personal convention.
Yeah, like again, like asking everyone, okay, you play my game, now come to my Discord chat for a 20-minute discussion. That I don't think is really
Yeah,
going to work.
no, it does not work. I mean, even if you could, what are you going to get out of it? What are you going to garner out of it? That people are going to say you can't see people's faces.
Hmm.
People are just going to type one word, two words, and what you extrapolate from, again, it's like someone can text you something, and what they texted you in their head and what you
Hmm.
read is completely different.
Yeah.
So you get all those type of things that happen from that type of environment.
Hmm. And I was just thinking about like when you're trying to get these shows organized. I guess it's another general question about like from a virtual standpoint. When developers want to have like their own mini festival, best visual novel games out of Germany, games out of West Coast, East Coast, whatever. How does that work? Like, do they get in touch with Steam and say, "Hey, we want to put on a event, this week in April to April 22nd"? Like, I guess what is like the logistics around that?
About organizing like a regional Steam festival.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you would do that, but I think you would contact, like Steam would have who's in that area, and then you
Mm-hmm.
would just set up, okay, we only want developers from this area, and then we set up only a festival for the developers in that area.
Hmm. Because I think one way, like at least from where I'm looking in terms of how they can improve these festivals, like you said, like, there has to be, I think, a better way of connecting to the developers. I know they will put up like, excuse me, they'll have like live stream events, but when you
Yeah.
miss the live stream, it's all that's gone. Like that's not really going to
Yeah,
help you.
and I've literally missed like every live stream. If I wanted to catch a game from on like Steam or whatever
Mm-hmm.
from the developer, I would miss every live stream. And then you don't want to watch an old live stream of
Mm-hmm.
if the festival's still going on. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I think like maybe organizing that a little bit better. Maybe even going as far as having a schedule maybe a week prior. I think
Yeah,
one of the things I think Steam could definitely do a better job with is preparing this stuff in advance. Because in a lot of cases, you won't know it until it's literally the minute of.
the minute of it, and it feels very chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually feels very chaotic. You don't know what demos are there, how long it's going to last, who's
What
streaming
events?
what events exactly, and so you don't know what's happening. And so while it's going on, I don't know what's happening in the festival. I know a festival's happening, but what exactly is happening? So
Mm-hmm.
if they could, if they could structure it, like you said, like an online virtual event
Mm-hmm.
that everybody followed, I think that would definitely help, and that would be something uh, worth looking into for sure.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's anything else. Any topics regarding trade shows and marketing from you?
Mm, I am looking forward to going to my next one. Is all I can say.
I guess here's a question. As we were talking about kind of the viability of trade shows and these events, do you think we will see more specialized trade shows kind of come up? Like an adventure games only trade show, a modern retro one? Because as we said, like we're living right now kind of somewhere in between this crazy pandemic. And I'm just wondering, will those shows, thrive or decline in like the coming months or coming years? So obviously, like the major shows like TGS, Gamescom, Magfest, PAX, like they're not going to go anywhere. Like either they will restructure or they will just bite the bullet and go public again. But for like smaller shows where they are just organized by all the developers, do you think they will still have an opportunity?
Pandemic purgatory. I
Yeah.
don't know what it's. I definitely think so. Like tabletop RTSs and stuff like that. Definitely, I think that's very viable for them. Like I think we even had someone in the Discord that was trying to test a tabletop game
Mm-hmm.
just earlier. I mean, so definitely for sure, I can see for like card games, tabletops, those ones being for sure. I don't know for sure about like adventure games or stuff like that, but like fighting games, maybe. But I don't know. For some reason, I see like tabletop would be one of the strongest ones that could have
Mm-hmm.
their own niche trade show.
Yeah, and I think to Rat's comment about like genre specific, yeah, that's kind of my worry that if we're talking like genre by genre,
Yeah,
I just don't see it being big enough. I think like virtual, I think that could still work to some capacity, but
yeah. You could do like a boomer shooter
mhm,
convention or something, and that would work, or like a fighting indie game
mhm.
convention.
I know. I just remember like, isn't there like a big like? Doesn't id have a big a QuakeCon? That's every
QuakeCon,
summer. Yeah, it's in Austin, I
yeah.
believe.
Yes, in Austin. That one's I've always wanted to go to. I lived in Texas for like 36 years and I never went.
Yeah, so there is like big names like that, but I think that is obviously being boosted by the fact that it's there. And again, like as we said, like when you have like big names of these shows, that also provides its own kind of coverage. Like if you hear about a show and it's like some developer you've never heard of, or but if you hear Bethesda's attending or id or Nintendo, that kind of it's kind of like the whole like award season. Like if you hear one big name, there's gonna be other big
Other
names
big
there as
names.
well.
Yeah, and definitely. And then, well, if you can't have big names, then we just have a lot. Like we are talking about indie games, stuff like that. So you just have a ton of them, indie games together, and then that'll just raise uh, the cloud of that.
Hmm. And I do know we've been seeing a lot of smaller shows around like people of color, LGBTQ plus
Yes.
games. I think that is also really great because again,
Yes.
it's a great way of amplifying these voices.
Yeah, so instead of like genre specific, I think
Hmm.
something like that, more like LGBTQ and marginalized. I think those ones are definitely, because I think for the past few years, I've even noticed it like in GDC, we'll have some
Hmm.
indie developer stuff that's based on that,
Hmm.
marginalized groups and
Hmm.
things of that nature. So I think for sure that is going to be something that comes up online and on trade shows.
Hmm. Now, one thing that's been in the back of my mind, like whenever I talk about topics about conferences, trade shows, and X Fest, I would love to see kind of like a second chance festivals, like for games that have like less than like 500 reviews or less than 100 reviews, because there are a ton of games that completely get blown over or flown over. And I think the other issue when you have so many games competing that it does amplify, but in a lot of cases it can also amplify the games that are already big. Like you'll
Yeah.
see this on Next Fest where the top 5 games are going to be the games we already know about. Like we
Yeah.
know a Devolver game is going to be listed, or
Yeah.
we know if there's a new FPS from it's going to be on this page, or any one of the major names. And it's still, like you said, very hard for like small games, like the ones that probably need the show or need the boost the
The
most
most. Yeah.
to get that word out there. Because you can have, like for me, like when like each next festival, I will play 70 to 100 games, over the span of a week. But again, I'm not your general consumer. I'm not the guy who's just, browsing for one new game to play.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, you are definitely not the typical consumer in that regard.
Hmm. And again, like, it's still hard to find these games. And, like, trying to search for them can be a nightmare sometimes in terms of, like, how their store page or something is, like, very slow to go down these lists. Or even just to find the games. And again, like, most people these days, they're not typing into Steam, I want a new visual novel game, or I want a new RTS. They're just seeing what's the new releases, and that's it. And it's still incredibly difficult. I think why I would say like one of the big things I want to see besides just having smaller or more focused shows like that, I want more shows. Like I don't want to wait 1 year for a next one, even 6 months.
Yeah.
Like I think we should be having these shows, maybe every 2 months, maybe even a smaller show every once a month.
I think that's
But
a great idea. Yeah, every 2 months, something
mhm,
like that would be great if we just continually have the shows. I think that's a great idea.
yeah, because I think for one thing, it provides more room for the developers, and also doesn't force you that if I know there's a only one next fest for the next 8 months, I
Oof.
need to demand if I don't get this out on this day, I'm SOL for another year.
Yeah. So yeah, in that regard, that brings up a good point, Josh.
Hmm.
That actually will lighten the load for indie developers that are not. They're not. We don't have to specifically. We have one chance for the festival on Steam, and we can only
Hmm.
get the demo done. And if we don't, that's it. We missed it. And having multiple chances,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
there's 5, 6, 7 festivals that I could possibly get my game to, and so not only that, that amplifies. Right, I could put them in
Hmm.
every festival also. So if
Hmm.
it really opens up the opportunities in that regard. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
More festivals, more exposure. My question though is, if we have more festivals, will it kind of just create too much noise?
You beat me to. I was just thinking that. Yeah, the I was just about to play devil's advocate. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
other point. Like when something is the one thing of a year or one every 6 months, it has that sense of prestige to it. If you do one major event a year, that's a big deal. If you do
Right.
12 mini events a year, it may just get to that point of, oh god, I just finished playing the February next
I
fest, and
just
now
did
it's the
that festival
March.
again, another one, right? And then so you can get the opposite effect
Hmm.
going on from it as well. So maybe find a medium, maybe just like 4 a year or so. What is it right now? How many Steam doing currently? Is it 4?
I don't know. They do have like festivals. They have a summer
Yeah,
festival, but in terms of like actual Next Fest,
the next
I
fest. Yeah,
think that's once a year,
just
but
one.
I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, because like it started with E3, and when
Mm-hmm.
E3, that all eyes were on E3, and that was the one thing. Like literally, game journalists and they would be
Mm-hmm.
prepping for months and months, getting ready to up to E3, and everybody was getting ready. It was a whole thing leading up to it. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I would say if we're talking specifically about Next Fest or like a quote unquote major virtual trade show, I would say maybe minimum 3 to 4 year. I think that
yeah,
is a healthy number. I think any more than that, and then we start to run that risk of just diluting the market in that regard.
yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think so. 4 a year, something like that would probably be the perfect amount. Um, yeah, we dilute it if you go way higher than that, and then again, people would just get tired of the festivals, and then it doesn't. And then again, it's not special anymore if it's just constant, just
Yeah,
constantly having special. It's
yeah,
always on sale.
yeah. Do you think we need to see more specialized events? Again, like, a marginalized developer festival, a festival dedicated only to visual novels, festival dedicated to developers of Brazil. Do you think we need to see a lot more
Yeah,
of them?
yeah, I think so. I think
Mm-hmm.
definitely, and I think that'll be more helpful, probably because it'll there's a lot of like even marginalized genres and
Mm-hmm.
marginalized, like that's a strange thing to say, marginalized genre, but there's a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
marginalized areas that really could be brought to light, right? And if so, I think that would be the best. I think that's one of the best things that we could do
Mm-hmm.
in that regard, and that would also help. It would be different because each one would be okay for this is for this type of marginalized group or these type of marginalized devs or this type
Mm-hmm.
of genre, and so it would raise awareness for that specific one instead of being the same all games, all games, all games,
Yeah.
and it would make some differentiation for that, and also help bring coverage to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like I said, like for the major ones, like we're talking Next Fest, something huge, 3 to 4 a year, I think, of a major one. But for like smaller ones, more that are genre focused or specifically developer focused like that, I think the more the merrier. Because,
More
like
the
you said,
merrier.
like we're not playing all the game at a event for adventure games or for marginalized developers. We're playing a very specific audience, and that again is a great way of amplifying it. And to Rat's comment, yeah, I think the only way we're going to see that, and here's the cynic in me, is that I think we need like Epic to maybe do it first, like to try to steal the idea, and then Steam will like try and one up them and do their own show.
There you go. That's how it works.
But
We
I
lost
think
chat
if there's
there.
anything else, again, like I'm holding back talking about demos specifically, like
Yeah,
demos
because
and
that's a whole.
prologues.
Yeah,
Because yeah, we can certainly spend another 2 3 hours on that
yeah.
one.
Well, we're gonna tack on 4 hours for demos.
Yeah,
Let's wait till Comcast fix it. No, we'll do that one.
yeah. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I guess any final thoughts about trade shows and festivals?
Uh, I think okay. I think it's the best of times and the worst of times. In both regards, like it's probably the best time right now. I think, like I said, this is the peak. If you're going to do an online show right now, is the best. It's not. They're not oversaturated right now. It's a good time. People are still interested. They're not super tired of them, so that's good. And then trade shows are going to be coming back up. I feel like in another year or so.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like trade shows are really going to be ramping back up. We're going to see a ton for like marginalized groups, for small indies, stuff like that. I think those are really going to be popping up. So I think it's going to be the best of both worlds. Really coming up, we're gonna start seeing more festivals online, and I think we're going to see a lot more trade shows starting to pop back up soon. And it's going to be a good convergence. So I really think it's probably the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, like you said, like it's definitely the best of both worlds. I think at the end of the day, I think we need both. Like, we shouldn't be all physical or
Yeah.
all digital. And both have their own strengths and weaknesses, just like demos with Rat Tail having pluses and drawbacks. But I do feel like we need to kind of, I think, up the game when it comes to virtual festivals to try and
Yeah.
really emphasize those advantages. And yeah, like maybe doing something about organizing more like virtual talks. Because that was one of the big things that a lot of people complain about with GDC, that you still can't get a lot of those talks virtually, even beyond their whole crazy subscription service.
Yeah.
And that I think is a huge mistake. I think this is something that I said in a post a few weeks ago about, the online age, that we live in an online world, that if you're only thinking locally with your video game, with your business, with whatever, you're really missing out. And that is the advantage of virtual. Oh, looks like we got bots just as we come to the end. Let's get rid of that. We were so good with the bots for like a few weeks, and then they just reappear again.
Yeah, I haven't seen them for a while. Yeah.
It could be that I'm getting more and more famous, so more and more bots are coming.
Yeah. When you get the plaque in the back, it's going to be covered in bots, man.
I won't be able to read chat. It'll just be all bots. Yeah, but yeah, like I think like with these shows, like you need to be thinking virtually. And the first group, I think, who can really nail a virtual trade show, I think they're going to really set themselves apart. Now, what that virtual show will look like, that I think will remain to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, and there was around like dude, when it was first everything was getting started. People were trying to do online trade shows. They would set up like a virtual booth, and you could walk around in the virtual booth, and like you would go to the game, right? So like you control a player, and you would go to the game, and they were trying to set up like, okay, well, the game is the expo, so you download a game. I think Devolver did that too. You would download the demo, and then you could go play the games in the demo itself. So it was like you were in the expo, but the expo was empty, and you would go play the games in there. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the person who nails a really good online virtual expo, that's going to be the secret right there. Where we can still get interaction that doesn't feel stale and soulless. We can still get good feedback and player feedback and interactions, and stuff doesn't really get buried in the noise. I think that'll be really amazing when someone cracks that code.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about demos next time, we need to discuss stuff like the haunted PlayStation 1 demo discs and kind of like these like compilation events that people have been trying.
I love the haunted PlayStation disc.
Mm-hmm. All right, but I think we'll wrap things up here for this week. It sounds like next week will be a demo talk, so I think we both want to certainly discuss that. But as always, if you have suggestions for topics for future shows, please let us know in the comments, as well as to the Discord, which will be a link up there as well as in the description.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And if you want to follow me, you know where to follow me at casual_scrub. A link will be down below. You can follow me working on Samurai Pig and see what's going on there. Always be sure to join Josh's Discord so we can talk about game design and all those amazing things.
Do all the liking, subscribing, and commenting of the YouTube algorithm. You can follow me on Twitter as well. We'll be back next Saturday around 4:35 p.m. ET. And as always, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, whereas they are on science of games. And as always, Josh, thanks for being the co-host. We'll see if we get the microphone and internet and all those other issues fixed in the spare time.
We're going to have a premiere studio by the next time you see it's going to be.
All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend, and see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you, everyone.